Thank you, Jim. And I'm tempted after hearing Provost Mulligan's introduction to just say ditto and enjoy lunch or something. No. I don't think this room, I have to convince a lot of the people in this room that writing matters. We're among friends here. But what we and many of us in this room are tasked with in today's culture is convincing everybody else that this is still true. And the people who need convincing includes our students, I'm afraid. It definitely includes our leaders in government and elsewhere. There's always, when I give these talks, and I give many of them, the initial drafts are somewhere for like a 45, 50, 60-minute talk. The initial drafts are somewhere around 95 slides. So I had 95 slides of stuff I wanted to say. It's been cut down considerably. But I just say this to say, I can't tell you everything I would like to tell you. There are very specific things we can do around how we frame writing, how we teach writing, how we assess writing, and if any of you want to have further conversations about that, I'm easy to find. Jim's got my email. It's also all over the internet because people email me out of the blue. But today, I just want to walk through kind of the mindset that I have adopted towards this stuff and that I kind of recommend for others to help us manage this transition, manage these changes. So I'm going to start with what I see as what's become pervasive, the transactional model of education, and why this is a problem. I'm also going to illustrate why I think AI can't write, why it does not write. Perhaps my definition of writing is idiosyncratic, but if so, it's still correct. In context of both of those things, we should examine what we should be teaching students. And I've been having these conversations with good folks here over the last couple of days. And I have to say, not just saying this because I was invited here to this lovely event in this lovely place, Iona is well ahead of many of the places I visit in terms of thoughtful conversations about these things. And then some recommendations, how we renew the space for learning. So what does it mean for education to be a transaction? Does anybody remember this article when it came out? New York Magazine? Wendy. Wendy was the star. Now the author of this article, James Walsh, he talked to me for this article for well over an hour. I am not quoted in the article. Sometimes that happens. Sometimes you're interviewed on like background, right? But I think I'm not quoted in the article because my fundamental message was we shouldn't freak out about this stuff. The article that instead was written was we really should be freaking out about this stuff. James Walsh is a good guy and a good journalist, and there's nothing in this article that's not accurate and true to the facts. But I can, being somebody who writes these sorts of things sometimes, I can just imagine his excitement when he found Wendy, the central subject of the article. And Wendy is a student who uses AI for everything. And she used AI to write her philosophy paper about the educational philosopher Paulo Freire. And her opening line on that is, to what extent is schooling hindering students' cognitive ability to think critically? So that was written by the AI. And Jim Walsh, the journalist, says, later I asked Wendy if she recognized the irony in using AI to write not just a paper on critical pedagogy, but one that argues learning is, quote, what makes us truly human. She wasn't sure what to make of the question. I use AI a lot, like every day, she said. And I do believe it could take away that critical thinking part, but it's just, now that we rely on it, we can't really imagine living without it. Cue freak out. These students obviously exist. It's not every student. I had a chance to interact with probably 30 or so students across a couple of classes yesterday, and it's clearly not every student. I interact with students at many different institutions as I go around talking about these things, but it does exist. Rather than freaking out about what Wendy is doing, I started thinking about what Wendy had done. And the question that came into my mind is, how did Wendy make it all the way to college, internalizing the belief that her ideas fundamentally do not matter, that her job is to quite literally parrot whatever winds up in the output of a large language model. Wendy's not alone. This article came out this summer in the New Yorker. Hua Su spoke to some students at NYU, including the main subject of his, who was Alex, who was using ChatGPT to do everything that wasn't really part of his major, which was accounting. And Hua Su asked him, why? Why? Here's what Alex had to say. I'm trying to do the least work possible because this is a class I'm not hella effing with. He didn't say effing. This is out there. Now, unfortunately, these are the narratives that are spreading in the most widely read places, and the counter narrative, like what's happening in places like Iona, is not being heard. I actually tried to pitch articles about my visit here. A little uncomfortable, like, are they paying you? It's like, yes. But, it's like, it would be like, let me see what they're doing at a place where they're tackling this actively. And there just is not a lot of interest because the story is complicated and nuanced. And that doesn't get people clicking. Now, this is not an entirely new problem. I would like to share a quote from a different student from a different era. I'm trying to do the least work possible because I'd rather do something else. Me, the entirety of my college education. Now, my things were things like go out with my girlfriend, the lacrosse club, sleep. I learned to never schedule a class before 11 a.m. So it's not as though students have been reluctant to engage with their educations. I avoided work often. I chose easy classes. I took classes I know I could not have to learn that much and still do okay. So it's not new, but it is different because now we have this machine that could do all that stuff for me. I really shudder to think what I would have been like had this been around when I was in college. So education is a transaction. Let's think about what students know about education. They view their education as a discrete series of tasks to be judged on the product. All of those things that I couldn't agree with more, that Provost Mulligan was talking about, character formation and the self and belief and these things. We know those are part of being educated, but students do not internalize that notion from their own experiences of education. We've created a system of what I call indefinite future reward, where the thing you're doing for school today will not matter until some period in the future. You should listen. Jim and I recorded an episode of the Iona podcast yesterday. I tell a story in that podcast that's also in my Why They Can't Write book about a student I had at Clemson who told me in a class, I can't wait until I retire, where I thought it meant seize the day. Yes, great. She meant, oh no, I'm looking forward to retirement so I can live. A sort of ultimate example of this. A kind of persistence matters more than curiosity. Just tell me what to do and I'll do it and I'll get the grade. And then interest and engagement are secondary to following a prescription that results in the desired outcome of the transaction. I see this fundamentally, our dealing with AI in education as a demand side issue. That is, students' desire to use it in ways we wish they wouldn't. And part of the problem with that is the system incentivizes a transactional mindset. And not the kind I had, which was, I want to sleep, hang out with my girlfriend, and play lacrosse. Instead, what Hua Su saw these students, none of these students I spoke with seemed lazy or passive. They were radically resourceful. It's a culture of performance and optimization. where he saw a streamlined path to a degree that was going to get him a job, and et cetera, et cetera. The only long-term solution to this, I think, is to reduce that student demand to outsource their learning, and even in some cases, their very lives, their experiences of the world. And the difficult news is that this is a multi-front problem where we have limited effect at different levels. Many of you in this room are frontline educators. You're in classes. In a lot of cases, you have at least some autonomy over the practice of your pedagogy. A layer above that, we have our institutional structure and priorities. Many of us, when we were working in these institutions, had almost no influence over those. I remember when I was at one of my stops along the way, and I was a non-tenure track lecturer in English, and they handed down the general education learning assessments, and they were like 4 bullet-pointed lists, and I looked at them and said, nope, 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 nope. That's not what I do. So I ignored them. But not everybody gets to do that. Sometimes you get in trouble for that kind of thing. And then, of course, we have society and culture. This larger narrative around where this technology is going, pushed both by like technology companies, which say we can replace these things, but also journalists who have a compelling story to tell that might not be the full story. So the problem of education as a transaction is it really does turn students into customers, and then the AI artifact satisfies the transaction. I'm not making this up. There is a long history of this, where we privilege schooling over learning, where we allow what I call academic cosplay, a pretending. Not as good as cosplay. Cosplay, actually, everybody knows we're pretending, right? To create not the thing, nobody thinks, yes, we are in medieval somewhere. We're getting in touch with this. But the 5-paragraph essay, which is utterly ubiquitous in schools, is a simulation of writing that has, in fact, prevents us from learning the skills of writing. So again, this is not a new problem. I started writing against these practices in the early to mid 2000s. That book was published in 2018, and yet it persists. We might like to believe, well, my students are that way, but in aggregate, they really are. This was from the student voice survey that Inside Higher Ed conducts and publishes every spring. This was the most recent one. And what this data shows is that students see themselves as customers. 41% say, yes, I'm a customer, both in classes and how the other ways I relate to the institution. Another 13% say, yes, but only in classes, which means more than 50% of students see themselves fundamentally as a customer when they are in a college class. And the success of the customer transaction is the grade. And being a customer is a very, very narrow identity. It is purely transactional. You go to Starbucks with your frequent buyer card and you get a credit and this kind of stuff. This is not what education is, and yet students believe this. So here's my general theory of the case before I move on to some specific applications. This is what I think we're tackling. Not all students have a transactional mindset. I met some yesterday who don't. And yet it is hard to deny that the system in which they are being educated signals to them that it is transactional. Those that do not have a transactional attitude, this requires a kind of resistance to thinking this way. They are bucking the overwhelming trend. I think it should be the opposite. And we've already heard remarks today that suggest the mission, one of the missions of this institution is to make it the opposite. We can't police our way to success. Keeping students away from it or detectors, this is just an endless arms race that will end in frustration for all involved. Pivoting exclusively, notice I emphasize exclusively, to analog forms like blue books or oral exams, limits the experience of learning. I think this is undeniable. I'm not against a thoughtful shift to those modes where we can argue that these support learning and they meet the demands of the occasion. But if we just say, I can only have them write blue book exams because I can't tell if they've done their work otherwise, you've reversed us into my college education, where I exclusively chose courses with in-class essays because I knew I could learn less and still get a B. 20% well-structured of the knowledge of the course, well-structured essay, B. Almost a guarantee. So we don't necessarily want to just retreat. It has to be about more than outcomes. This is not just we need students to be prepared for the workforce. This is life formation. It's so nice to be at a place that already believes that. No, honestly, because there's tensions. There's tensions around this because students pay a lot for their educations and they expect something that's going to benefit them. And you know, if we made these things free, those tensions would still be there. But the fact that it comes with loans and this sort of stuff ups the pressure. So these, I think, are the core of what we're trying to do. There's two questions we can help every student answer. Here's a big one. Who am I? And who am I is not just like you know, your demographic information, but like, what do I believe? What sort of person am I in the world? The other question is, how do I do this? And this is everything. This could be making my own dentist appointment, something I've seen students struggle with in college. This could be this course. This could be this assignment. This could be life. We're talking beforehand about back in the day how you used to have to like really research to sign up for your courses and figure out how to do that. And now that it's all automated, we've sort of removed some of how do I do this because it never has to be done. One of the things I think we have to constantly be thinking about is like, what are the experiences that provide us the kind of agency over answering that question for ourselves? How do I do this? Right? It's become popular to say, oh, I'm bad at adulting. And believe me, I'm bad at adulting sometimes. But being like not doing something right every time is, and knowing how to remedy that is fundamentally different from having no idea how to do it in the first place. So how do I know A, I can't write? I talk about this in detail in my book, but I'm gonna give the Cribs notes, the Cliff Notes version. All right, I'm gonna stick you people in a time machine. You're gonna go to a literal different time and place with 2 words, only 2 words. You have to sort of center yourselves and be ready for it. I'm gonna give you 2 words. If you're ready for it, are you ready? You send, and if people go to a different time and place, maybe I'll ask you to raise your hands and maybe you can share. Here are the 2 words, if you're ready. Here they are. Are you ready? They're coming. Cinnamon rolls. Cinnamon rolls. You went somewhere else. Where'd you go? Elementary school. Why? What's the? Oh, the honey bun on the way to elementary school. Yes. Who else went somewhere? Who else? Yeah. Where'd you go? The show Better Call Saul, where he works at. Who went to Cinnabon? I go to a very specific Cinnabon that doesn't even exist anymore. It was the Cinnabon between Terminals 1 and 2 in O'Hare Airport in Chicago at a period in my life where I was traveling sort of weekly. And every time I'd pass that thing coming and going, I'd be like, don't get it, 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 don't get it. I got it. Years after I did that, I was teaching public speaking at Virginia Tech, and a student, they had to give a sort of informative speech, and Virginia Tech had a Cinnabon on campus, and a student gave a speech about the pecan caramel Cinnabon, and it was like a whole day's worth of calories, 2 days worth of fat. Still, I eat it. So how could you not? Here's how, that illustrates how I know that AI can't write. Only humans have this sensory experience of the world. And that not only happens, but is encoded as experience and memory. And some of you, even you I could see you're like, and it's not accidental because sense memory is incredibly powerful, right? Or if you're driving and like a song comes on you weren't expecting, and all of a sudden you're transported to a particular time and place. This is a capacity that is only part of human experience. I'm too far away. There it is. We have the capacity for reflection and metacognition. That is, we can consider these paths, and also we can kind of arrange them around understanding how we learn. It builds on itself over time. With a large language model, they're doing the same thing over and over and over again. And even sort of the developments they've done in the user interface and chain of reasoning, it does not achieve this. It's nothing like this. Each human is a unique intelligence. No two of us have the same experiences of the world and then would express them in the same ways. One of the things I say in More Than Words is how much this is a greater marvel than what a large language model can do, which is just predictive modeling of syntax. And so that we find that amazing, that it can do that. It is sort of amazing. But the diversity of experience in the world is far more amazing to me than that. So this is how I think of generative AI. To me, a large language model is a very friendly, apparently high-tech Labrador who goes and fetches tokens, syntax, at my behest. It has no intelligence. It's very fast. And it's happy to do it because it's what it's designed for. I try to be mindful of my use of this technology because I am concerned about the environmental footprint. So I did do like 30 versions of this. I tried it twice. Could not get the goggles and headset off the thing. Like I said, give me an image of a Labrador retriever that represents the operations of a large language model. There's different people like Shannon Valor, who apparently was here. AI is a mirror. The stochastic parrot. We can look at AI as a cultural technology. Henry Farrell and Alison Gopnik say this. Warner says Labrador. I can't get that published as a paper yet for some reason. This is another framing of AI that I keep. I printed this out and keep it on my monitor at home. This is Eric Salvaggio, a thinker and writer who I highly recommend. He wrote this piece, A Critique of Pure LLM Reason. Models do not reason in the sense we might expect. Reason amongst humans could be defined as the power of the mind to think, understand, and form judgments by a process of logic. LLMs do not possess the power of the mind to think or understand things. The logic of LLMs, and by extension the, quote, reasoning of LLMs, is steered through language alone, and not language as a marker of thought, but language as an exchange of uncomprehended symbols sorted by likelihoods of adjacency. As a technical matter, that's amazing that it can do that. But as a practical matter, it's an illustration of how very different our minds are to the operations of a large language model. So I think we should see it as automation rather than intelligence. The production of syntax is a byproduct of writing and a byproduct of prompting a large language model, but they are not any way the same thing. It's a syntax fetching machine, which looks like a yellow lab. The process by which LLMs do this and how we do it is fundamentally different. And when it comes to learning, this is very important. We cannot lose sight of this. Writing is many things. I think at the top of the list for me is writing is thinking. It's not the only way to think, but it's a great way to think. It's inextricable from thinking. As you write, you think. And it's thinking along two dimensions, one of which is, and the base unit of writing is the idea, not the sentence. One of the mistakes we've made in schools for quite a long time is saying, students, you must learn to make your sentences and then you can start to write. That's it. I think that the technical term is ass backwards. Students must have ideas that they cannot capture with language so that they are induced to get better with language so they can capture the idea. This is simply how it works. When we are writing, we are both have a notion, right, the idea in our head that we're trying to get on the page, but I'm going to hope everybody in this room has experienced this while you are writing. While you are writing, the idea is altering shape. A new idea is forming. And it's distressing for me to talk to college students who've never had this sensation while they're writing because they were fundamentally performing a simulation governed by rules. I got to visit a first-year writing class yesterday, and I asked, as I like to do, like, what were you told about writing essays in high school? And they were told things like, do a 5-paragraph essay, have the thesis at the end of the first paragraph. They were also told things I've heard for years, like the number of sentences to have in each paragraph. That's the technical term for that is nuts. When we write, we discover things. Often we discover what we think ourselves. And then writing is this sort of iterative process. That there's a linear process which, like LLMs sort of demonstrate, is a lie. I give talks like this all the time. I've never given the same talk twice. Each time I go back and have a new audience and a new occasion, it evolves. Writing is also feeling. It's not a purely intellectual exercise. We experience the world as we write. And this is not just like creative writing or journaling or something like that. This can be anything. Writing shapes our worldviews and connects us to others. I like to use an anecdote I have in the book to illustrate this. This was during this is obvious when we're like writing an argument or a piece of creative writing or something like this, but this was a much more mundane form of writing. It was during the pandemic, in the fairly early weeks where like the access to the grocery store is restricted, right? And we were all masked up and we're one-way traffic with our carts in the aisles. And I saw, yeah, I had a gasp. We remember, it did happen. I was doing my shopping and I saw a Post-it note on the ground and I picked it up and it was someone's grocery list. I was like, oh crap. Like, do I need to find this person? Like this, like we're not supposed to, but I said it had like wheel marks on it. So I'm like, oh, it's probably old. I looked at it and had like regular items. I don't even recall what they were. But then at the bottom, it said, cherry Pop-Tarts, all capitals, underline, 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 exclamation point, exclamation point. Think of the act of that writing in the moment that list was created. The most important thing the person tasked with that shopping trip that day could do was come home with cherry Pop-Tarts. And that list was never intended for me, but it even connected me to this total stranger who I'll never know. Because it gave me a memory of like, oh yeah, I remember being like that when I was a kid. Like when mom brought home Pop-Tarts, but the wrong flavor. So writing is feeling. And these are the sorts of tasks that we've decided to automate, right? Automate your grocery list. Automate your student recommendation letter. Because it's time consuming and it's formulaic and we think it doesn't matter. But what happens when we choose to automate those things is we lose touch with the human experience and the communicative act of creating those things. So writing is an experience. It's a literally embodied practice. I hope everybody has had this sensation of writing and losing track of time. It's more common with reading, but it happens with writing. I had when I was finishing More Than Words, I had a literal tingling at the top of my head when my brain realized I was actually within like 50 words of the conclusion of the book. I'd actually planned a sort of coda or another chapter, but I was like, all of a sudden it's like, oh no, this is it. We're winding up for it. Writing obviously requires a process. If it's a process, it's an experience. And it's a unique cognitive experience, writing is. And the experience itself changes and evolves based on the occasion and when we're doing it. And of course, we learn to write through writing experiences. My objection to the 5-paragraph essay has been that the actual experience of preparing it is nothing like what you need to do to learn to write. So with learning, the experience is the point. One of the enthusiastic early uses for this technology has been to like summarize a lot of information, and sometimes that's useful to us. But when we summarize something, we read, we are thinking, we are feeling, we engage in judgment and discernment. We didn't plan it either. And then we recommunicate the product of that process when we write. When we ask a large language model to do it, it's a predictive condensing. There's no judgment. In fact, there's a lot of research into what happens, increasing amount of research into what a large language model does when it's summarized. And it's not selecting, it's merely condensing. And so it often misses what humans say was the most important part of it. Now, for like a corpus of information that we could never hope to deal with, very useful. But if we lose the capacity for this first thing, we are beginning to de-skill ourselves in important ways. So what should we be teaching students? I want to tell a story from my past. And the main characters of the story are me and Leo. All right, I gotta set this stage fairly quickly. So, in 1997, I finished my schooling with 3 worthless degrees. An undergraduate degree in rhetoric, creative writing. I had graduate degrees in English literature and creative writing. I was broke, but not in debt. I had gone to graduate school in Lake Charles, Louisiana. I returned to my hometown of Northbrook, Illinois. My parents had downsized, so I did not have a room anymore. There was a room with a bed in it and a desk, but that was apparently my dad's office that he had never used, but I was not allowed to sleep in. So I was in the basement. And my mom, being my mom, she was at the grocery store. She owned a bookstore in my hometown. She knew everybody in my town. A guy, she sees a former customer, says, "Sue, how's it going?" She's like, "I got this deadbeat in my basement. He's 27. He's got no prospects." This guy, I don't know if he still works. He's still around, but he worked as a turnaround expert, CEO or CFO for companies in bankruptcy. So the creditors bring him in and install him as a temporary CEO. He works 4 months a year. And the rest of the time he goes around doing talks like this for different audiences that pay him vast sums of money. And he wanted to self-publish a book on his management philosophies because he's like, then I can get them also to buy this book. Because they'll do whatever I say because they want me to come talk. And so he hired me to ghostwrite his book. I'd never done this before, but he was, by his nature of his work, very cheap. And I did it, and he liked it. I had learned PageMaker in college in a desktop publishing course. And he said, all right, now you're going to go meet Leo. And he gave me the name Leo and an address, 455 East Illinois Street, Chicago, Illinois. I arrive at 455 East Illinois Street. I see on the door it says Leo J. Shapiro and Associates. Because I'm a master of deduction, I start thinking this guy Leo may be important around here. Indeed, this is Leo J. Shapiro, the founder of this firm. He looked a fair bit like that when I met him. He lived till he was about 96. When I met him, he was in his mid-80s. Still went to work every day. He also had had a childhood bout of polio, so could not walk without assistive crutches. This guy is a badass. And what you need to know about Leo is that he made me cry. He actually made me cry twice. So here's the first time. I'm interviewing with Leo. I'm just in his office. He's got a corner office with a view of Lake Michigan and down Lakeshore Drive in Chicago. And he's just looking at my resume with an utter look of disgust. And he said, this is verbatim because I wrote it down, "Why would anyone go to school to learn to write? That's idiotic." Hemingway went to war. What good are you to me? My response in that moment was, well, there wasn't a war going on at the time. And Leo replied, "There's always a war somewhere, son." It didn't go well. I left. I had rented a basement apartment, a garden apartment in the north side of Chicago near Wrigley Field. I walked home from the office. It was about 4 miles. I had to take my shoes off because they were like brand new dress shoes. I looked like a hobo. And I drank a 40-ounce malt liquor that I had gotten at the 7-Eleven next door to the office, because it's legal if you keep it in the paper bag. I don't know if you're aware of that. And I was just like so frustrated because I'm like, this is it. This was my shot. I had an interview the next day as a bar back at the bar where one of my friends worked. I needed money to pay my rent. Instead, I got a call the next day from a woman named Sarah Parikh who's like, "Leo says you should come down and start doing stuff for us." Apparently, if you don't cry in front of Leo, you get the job. So I go down. It wasn't clear to me for a week if I was actually getting paid, but I wasn't asking. But I went to work at this place, and I was doing well. I was doing qualitative research, focus groups, and this sort of stuff. And it was very natural to like write a report from a bunch of text of what people had said. And I was quite good at it, and I was succeeding. I was like, I could do this for a long time, write these reports. But then I got a call from Leo. I'd been there about 6 months. I had not spoken to him since the interview. And his number showed up on like my inter-office phone, his extension, and he called me into his office. And he said this to me. He said, "I need you to draft a questionnaire for a study for the Save the Redwoods League, investigating their donation habits with the purpose of uncovering information that will help the league increase their revenue base." This was a quantitative study. I had not taken math since senior year of high school and did not distinguish myself at that time. I had not taken research methods. I had no background in sociology. I didn't know how to do this, how to write a questionnaire. He was very frank with me, Leo. He said, "You're doing this because our professional time on this is being donated, and you're the least important person." So I thought, I'm dead. End of job. Like, this is the big test. I went to the men's room, went into a stall, cried briefly, got my stuff together, and I had a memory of a different time. This was my first semester of graduate school at McNeese State University, and I had entered as a fiction writer, but all the fiction writers also had to take form and theory of poetry. And I was afraid of this class because I was afraid something like this might happen. My professor said, "You are to write an explication of a single poem discussing how the language, imagery, and structure to combine to help convey the poem's meaning. 15 to 20 pages should do." My first thought was like, I guess I'll write on an epic or something. Leaves of Grass, Here I Come. He also said like, no longer than a sonnet. So I was going to write more pages than the poem had lines. I'm dead. I didn't want to drop out of school, so I engaged in a problem-solving process. I went to my the classmates, colleagues who were a year ahead of me who had already taken this course, and I asked things like, "What's a poetry explication?" I got some examples, and I discerned the purpose. I looked at structure, what it looks like, and I realized I had this process. I could observe things, I could infer things from that observation, and then I could figure out what to say. And so I chose my poem. I chose a poem called God's Grandeur by the great Catholic poet Gerard Manley Hopkins. This was the actual poem. I didn't do this because I met Iona. And I started, as my professor John Wood, who I talk about in the book too, is a real character, as he would do in class, I started walking around my apartment reciting it, trying to feel the poem. And I started to notice some things. I noticed things like this line, why do men then now not reck his rod? Generations have trod, have trod, have trod. Those metrical feet mimic what it would be to trotting footsteps. I noticed something like this. Because the Holy Ghost over the bent world broods with warm breast and with bright wings. That vowel sound in and exclamation point cause this sort of pause that mimics the opening of these wings. And you should have seen what my paper looked like. I had scribbles all over the place. And I wrote the paper. It was like 20 pages long, and it was pretty good. John Wood was not one to make a lot of marginal comments. If he liked it, he would write excellent. If it was better than excellent, he would write brilliant. I think I got a brilliant on it. It was very affirming. So I used the same process for writing a questionnaire for Leo. What is a questionnaire? How is it structured? What do you do? There were quite literally thousands of them around the office, so I had many examples. I wrote a draft of the questionnaire. I showed it to Leo. He said, this is horrible. I revised it. He said, this is marginally less horrible. Until he said, all right, now go put it in the field. I said, what does that mean? And I learned how to get it programmed and brief the interviewers. This is back when everything was done over the phone or in a mall. This was an entirely phone survey. And 4 or 5 months later, I'm in San Francisco at the headquarters of the Save the Redwoods League, presenting this research. And I had a moment doing that work where I was like, I can't believe this is happening, that out-of-body experience with my worthless degrees. But what I had was a practice. No one told me I did. They had this. They should have. And I'll explain more about practice in a second. In October 1997, I didn't know that market research existed. By April of 1999, I had a title of project director, doing my own projects. I had minions. I had what I was when I started, who would go do stuff for me. I can't explain how utterly shocking it was to me to wind up in this spot. All of this is thanks to my liberal arts education, my worthless degrees. And I continue to be thankful for that because it allows me to be adaptable as things change over time. So I don't want to lie. This book, The Writer's Practice, which is a book of writing curriculum based in the idea that writings are experiences where we build our skills, our knowledge, our attitudes, and our habits of mind, took me about 8 months to write, but 15 years to experience. For years, I was teaching the writer's practice without calling it a practice. I didn't even come up with skills, knowledge, attitudes, habits of mind until I was writing the book. And I said, I have to describe what these are to other people because I know what they are. The goal to me was to help students develop an adaptable, flexible process that they can use over time. And ultimately, a practice is an expression of values, where in this case, skills are like writing process or research, rhetorical awareness, audience analysis, on and on and on. One of the attitudes I try to inculcate in students is that there's no terminal proficiency to writing. You can always get better. Knowledge is both knowledge of the subject we're writing about and knowledge of how writing works, how our process works. One of the things I love to see with students over the course of the semester where I get them working on writing on subjects of their interest is their building of their knowledge. And all of a sudden their writing is way better at the end because they're writing about stuff they know. And they'll look at the writing at the beginning and the end how did that happen? I'm you're writing about something, you know what the idea you're trying to express is. The questions I have for you, and if we had the rest of the day and then tomorrow we would go through this together, is, what do you want students to know? What do you want students to be able to do? And then what attitudes do you want to foster in students? Again, Iona is far ahead of other places in these conversations, but this stuff doesn't end. The experiences that will allow them to develop this practice may evolve over time, and it's not a fixed target. It never was, and it particularly isn't now. Even doing the same things, some of you have had this experience. I would teach the same course back to back to back to back, right, on a Tuesday, Thursday. And what worked at 10 a.m. fell apart at 3. Sometimes I would even say to like the 3 p.m. class, like, I know this is good stuff. This killed at 10. What's wrong with you? But who knows, like the chemistry, the time of day, post-lunch, looking. So we can't lose sight of the extreme variability of these things and honor and respect it. So how do we renew the space for learning? One thing we have to do is renew the attitudes of life beyond ROI. Do we know what ROI means? Return on investment. I stole this image from the Georgetown University Center on Education in the Workforce, which is the leading thinkers around what college is for, which is a tragedy, in my opinion. They're the recipient of literally tens of millions of dollars from our most dedicated educational philanthropists like Bill Gates to tell you what you should major in. And look at their image of what college is. You arrive, you're male, first of all. You've got a sweater from 1956 on and a backpack, and you have these giant coins, but not many of them. And you put them into the college machine, and you leave with the cap and gown and huge stacks of cash. If this is college, we're done. Because this is not an argument for maintaining institutions like Iona University. And yet, this is the prevailing attitude. One of the things I think we should do is imagine return on investment doesn't exist anymore because some people are promising that this is the case. Now, I happen to think Bill Gates is, colloquially speaking, high on his own supply. He is too close to this technology, too much of a believer in technological solutionism to see these things clearly. But let's say there's no doctors. Those health sciences majors have nothing to go do. Well, if that's true, what can we give students that's still of worth to them? And I think one of the things we can give them is the ability to adapt to a changing world. My worthless degrees have put me in front of you guys today. So I think we can continue to do that for students. One of the things we should renew, I think, is just engagement. Value, competence, relatedness, autonomy. This is very old. I cite this from the Cambridge Handbook of Learning Science, published 2006. I believe this is the revised version. So again, none of this should be news to us, and yet how often do we infuse the experiences of our course with this sort of thing first? We should renew fascination and appreciation. We should tell students, you're going to learn something fascinating. You're going to build capacities that will go beyond grades and credentials. You're going to answer the questions, who am I? How do I do this? We should tell them and be clear about it that a class is work. And it is very familiar to you guys. Labor is like central to the philosophy, right? Labor matters. The labor has its own importance. The labor infuses its own dignity. If we don't believe this, then why are we here, honestly? I wanted to share an example of how I tackled this. I had to tackle it early because I was teaching first-year writing where every student was a conscript. And where I would ask them, if you could not do this class but still get an A, you would learn nothing, do nothing. How many people would take that bargain? A majority. And towards the end of my career, the overwhelming majority. They had wholly internalized this transactional mindset. So I had to get them to believe first-year writing is an important course not just because they're going to write papers, but for their very lives. And so I started formatting my course policies as a frequently asked questions from the point of view of students. And the first day of class, I would print out the questions and number them, hand them to students as they walked in. And then they would sit down and be like, you guys probably have some questions. Who has the first question? We go through them, and this is sort of, after some initial preamble, the question is, why is the university making me take this course? And I respond, for the most part, while there are some exceptions, most of the learning in high school and before is in the service of acquiring information. You've learned facts and figures and been asked to prove your acquisition of this information. You probably know the difference between meiosis and mitosis. And then I ask some student to tell me, and then somebody knows. You've been told that when Hamlet starts his soliloquy with "to be or not to be," he's demonstrating the duality of his nature and the conflict at the center of the play. You know what a soliloquy is, et cetera, et cetera. But I say this is irrelevant or actively insufficient. Students being students, they say, this is not answering the question. And I say, higher education is different. Higher education is about the acquisition of knowledge. Knowledge is what happens when information is filtered through a particular point of view, a unique intelligence. I am not lying, so this was from around 2011, 2012. And that phrase, unique intelligence, is all over my book More Than Words, and I didn't realize it was in this document until I started to prepare for a talk I used it in a couple weeks ago. So clearly this stuff has been rattling around in my brain. Say apples have fallen from trees since the dawn of mankind. It took Isaac Newton being allegedly bonked by one on the head for the theory of gravity coming into existence. You are a bunch of unique intelligence. Your role here is to prove to me that you can pay attention, not that you can pay attention to write stuff down, regurgitate it, but to pick up an oar and start helping us row the good ship of the world towards greater enlightenment. The students at this point are looking at me like I am insane. But I am committed to the gag. And I introduce them to the academic conversation, the underpinning of the course. I'm starting to win them over. This sounds like it might be useful. I say it's beyond useful. It's the key to ultimate happiness and fulfillment. You're exaggerating for effect, right? And I say not really, because what I'm promoting to them is that if they learn how to think, if they learn how to process the world, if they learn how to access their own unique intelligences, they can make sense of a very strange place, which is this planet and this society. This was back, how do I know this is 2012? Given the once dim but brightening economic climate, that's where it is, the shifting nature of work and the unpredictable needs of employers, it's difficult to figure out what the right path might be while you're spending your time at College of Charleston, but through assessment and examining information, you can come to a conclusion that's rooted in evidence while also being consistent with your own values and desires. That's the goal. And I told them the work in this class could do it. I don't know that I convinced all of them that they didn't suddenly become English majors. But at the very least, they believed that I believed it. And that I could show them things of interest over the course of the semester. And that's where I would recommend, if you haven't started already, thinking about your own classes. What's fascinating? How do I get students to appreciate this? So to wrap, this is my working list of the things that I think we should be teaching students about this stuff. One is, I think students should know how the technology works, quite literally works. Because this fundamentally changes their attitudes towards it. I did an audience with some students last spring, and I described, I had more slides on it, but essentially the Eric Salvaggio quote and predictive text, and a student just jaw dropped. And I said, I'm sorry, I can't help but ask, what's going on in your head right now? And he said, I thought it was searching the internet and coming up with the best answer. So that fundamental misapprehension caused them to see the technology differently. Capacity for deep judgment. If we coordinated ahead of time, I would have called this discernment, because that's exactly the right word. Is something accurate or inaccurate, or if you prefer, true and false? This must be developed in the absence of using AI because it's something that we have to have ourselves. And then what I call taste. Is something good or bad? Is it worth my time or not worth my time? So that we can have people rejecting things like AI slop in music, video, writing over time. and attention. And not attention just like focus, but that deep attention and concentration, that lost sense of time as we're thinking and working. These are the things that I think we should pay attention to. My final thought, and then I hope we have some time for questions. The thing that appears most vulnerable to LLM automation may be the thing most worthy of preservation. Me right now. I thought of that like on the plane. Because I was going through my own slides and thinking like, what's the new thought you have thinking about what you're about to do? And this is the thing I want to worry over. And I just want to leave you with a sort of battle cry, I guess. And that battle cry is, remember the Pop-Tarts. Because we may, in the interest of efficiency or speed, automate things that we shouldn't. And it's much easier to not lose those in the first place than it is to try to reclaim them. Thank you for your time. I think we're doing questions, right? Thank you.